You're watching Africa 54. Good evening and welcome. I'm Haiti Adams-Fitzpatrick in for Vincent McCory, who is off today. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has one of the world's largest populations of child soldiers. The United Nations Children's Fund estimates up to 30,000 children there are forced to serve various armed groups as soldiers, sex slaves and laborers. Michel Chikwanine was one of them. He's now a refugee in Canada. Our reporter Lisa Bryant caught up with him in Normandy, France, and brings us this story.
Michel Chikwanine is a long way from eastern Congo, where he grew up, but not from the memories of war. They haunt him every night, ever since he was captured by rebels at the age of 5, playing soccer with his friends.
And so I started to cry, and I begged them again to let me go home. Instead, they forced me to kill someone, and they forced me to kill my best friend.
Chikwanine was drugged and trained to use firearms before he managed to escape. But more violence followed. Chikwanine's family became casualties of the Democratic Republic of Congo's chronic unrest that has killed and displaced millions during the past 2 decades. His father, a human rights activist, was kidnapped. Then soldiers came to his house and grabbed his mother and 2 sisters.
And they started to rape them. And they held me on the wall and they told me to watch what was happening to try and send a message to my father.
I started screaming at them, telling them to let me go home. Eventually, they hit me with a gun in the back of my head and I passed out.
Today, Chikwanine talks about his experience to audiences around the world, including here in Normandy. His family fled to Uganda, but then his father died, apparently from poisoning. Soon after, the remaining family was granted asylum in Canada.
The second assault wave came in. In one American sector, enemy resistance was only...
France's western Normandy region is a fitting place to talk about war. Tens of thousands of soldiers died here during World War II. Most were barely past childhood. In the DRC, clerics are spearheading the fight for peace and demanding long-delayed elections be held. From his diocese in southern DRC, Bishop Fulgence Muteba has tried to help former child soldiers.
Ce sont des enfants que j'ai vus traumatisés, psychologiquement abattus.
These were children who were traumatized, psychologically and inhumanely battered. They almost had no feelings. They were so familiar with violence that their lives were no longer worth living.
Bishop Muteba says many are left to cope on their own. Some commit suicide. Others return to further violence. Chikwanine says even those who make it are forever scarred.
My fear is that we've become a community, an international community that normalizes wars, but does not normalize peace. And this is what is happening in the Congo specifically.
He hopes the lessons of Normandy, where an international peace conference was held this month, will carry over to DRC. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Caen, France.
Well, we're staying in France now, and French President Emmanuel Macron is meeting new Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte in Paris. High on the agenda, the migrant crisis. The meeting comes just days after sparks flew between the 2 leaders over Rome's rejection of a ship packed with hundreds of migrants. Italy had refused to allow the Aquarius, a rescue boat carrying 629 migrants picked up off Libya's coast, to dock on its shores. Most of them, the migrants, were from Africa. Macron called the decision cynical and irresponsible. Italy responded, saying it won't take, quote, hypocritical lessons. Spain allowed the ship to dock at its port of Valencia. Now it seems Macron and Conte have made up. They're downplaying their spat, but the clash underscores the deep divides in Europe on how to deal with another summer surge of migrant arrivals from across the Mediterranean. Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid. The end of Ramadan is a period of feasting and sharing with friends and strangers. In Egypt, where the currency has been devaluated and other painful measures were instituted as part of an IMF loan package, Ramadan was especially difficult for many. Edward Uranian is in Cairo for us with more.
It was the perception of a strong economy that got Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi re-elected earlier this year. Supporters cheered his victory, and commentators applauded his willingness to take the risk of devaluating the currency with the promise of restoring the country's economy. But on the streets and in the markets of Cairo, those results were yet to be seen by shoppers or vendors this Ramadan. The reality many here express is that they are unable to afford many of the things, including the staples, they once could. Shoppers making the rounds of local markets discovered that prices have risen for many items like fruits and vegetables that are key ingredients for their favorite Ramadan meals. Mohammed, a father of 5, shows VOA his almost empty refrigerator and explains his predicament.
One day we eat falafel, while on other days we eat beans or lentils. We just try to make do for the whole month, as everyone else does.
Wholesale prices have gone up, reflecting world commodity prices, which are traded in dollars. That makes selling products on the local market more difficult. Amr, a date vendor, says wholesale prices have often doubled, making foodstuffs difficult to sell.
People who used to buy 10 kilos of something are now buying only 5, or even just 3 or 4, so they have less money to spend. Who is going to be able to spend what they once could in past years?
Analysts warn that hardship may threaten stability.
The Egyptian government should provide a safety net and help to cushion rising prices on those who have limited incomes.
Amid the financial stresses of the end of Ramadan, President Sisi does, for the moment, appear to remain popular and firmly in control. Whether that continues could be determined by how much longer Egyptians continue to wait for the rewards of their sacrifices. Edward Uranian for VOA News, Cairo.
Nearly everywhere you look these days, another road, another bridge, another railway, another sports stadium is going up somewhere in Africa, all built by China. Beijing has been financing massive infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa in recent years. We want to show you just some of the most prominent projects. We're going to pull up a graphic here for you. The Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, the first electrified cross-border rail system in Africa. Kenya's multi-billion-dollar standard gauge railway that connects the capital Nairobi to the port city of Mombasa. In Uganda, the massive controversial Kampala-Entebbe Expressway. Cote d'Ivoire's Subre hydropower plant, and Cameroon's Kribi deep-sea port, the biggest and only deep-water port in Central Africa. And, of course, the list goes on. Last year, China surpassed the U.S. as Africa's largest trading partner. So what does U.S. investment in Africa look like at the moment? Joining us via Skype from Davis, California, is Grant Harris. He's the CEO of Harris Africa Partners. Grant, hello there. Tell us, China's presence obviously is very ubiquitous on the continent. What is America building in Africa these days?
Thank you for having me on. America's still got a very strong and significant investment presence, but I think what you hear from many commentators is that it's just not where it needs to be. And there's been some steps taken, particularly under the Obama administration. It's a little unclear what the Trump administration's policies will be, but some of the early signs are pretty worrying in terms of de-emphasizing a push for promoting U.S. investment across the continent and really rolling back some of the trade efforts. But I think there's a lot of headroom at the end of the day. Some U.S. investors are quite serious, but we're not seeing them in the numbers that we need to.
So we've always talked about the race between China and the U.S. for investment primacy in Africa. What is the status of that race? Is it on? Is it off? Is it over?
I think a lot of people like to characterize it as a race for some sort of supremacy, but I don't think it's really like that. There's some places where there is competition for sure, but at the bottom line is that many African states really need this capital and aren't going to care from which end of the globe it comes. That said, I'd really like to see more American companies taking a serious stake and increasing their exposure. And I do think that there are differences in how the investments occur. You mentioned some really important signature projects by China, But for the most part, there isn't a lot of transparency about Chinese financing, and they tend to be pretty opaque deals. And we've seen more and more concerns about African governments that are very highly indebted to China. About 14% of bilateral debt for sub-Saharan African countries, when you take out South Africa, is owed to China. And I think that there will be a very high cost for that.
Very briefly, Grant, what is the investment landscape like right now? Do you actually have to build something in an African country in order to build trust or a meaningful relationship?
I think relationships are much deeper than that. And that's one thing that the United States has in terms of decades of deep relationships, in terms of cultural ties, educational investments, investments in health, for instance, in combating HIV and malaria. But the relationships are really multifaceted. And China is not just making an economic play. It's also deepening its military relationships and its arms sales. It's deepening its cultural exchanges as well. And so the United States has a lot of very long-standing relationships to build on. But if the U.S. starts to retrench or starts to neglect the continent, I think those relationships are going to fray or really be weakened.
Grant Harris, thank you so much for your insights. It will be really interesting to see where all this goes in the next few years or so. Grant Harris, the CEO of Harris Africa Partners, speaking to us from Davis, California. And we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover here. You can join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. You're watching Africa 54. In a moment at the UN football as a reminder of the role of sports in peace. But first, here's a look at Friday's headlines.
In Madagascar, students gather to protest the return of the Minister of Higher Education, Marie-Monique Rosao Zananera, amid allegations that the new government is bringing back corrupt ministers. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a local priest, the Father Lucien Ambuga, is warmly welcomed back by his community after a full recovery from Ebola. His case is one of 62 that have been reported since the latest outbreak started in April. Migrants in a Tripoli detention center in Libya gather for prayers for the Islamic holiday Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of the holy month of Ramadan. In South Africa, natural local beauty products such as African black soap are sweeping the cosmetic industry due to rising consumer demand and support.
Now, some of you might know that summer jobs here in Washington, D.C. are notorious for low or no pay. But a new humanoid robot has managed to land itself a job for the summer. And it's been quite helpful to the docents at the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. VOA's Carolyn Turner explains.
At the Smithsonian Museum of African Art, visitors were entertained and intrigued by Pepper, the humanoid robot who has her first summer job helping the docents. And Pepper works for free. She was donated by her manufacturer, the Japanese company SoftBank Robotics. She's part of an experimental pilot project which has deployed robots to 6 Smithsonian museums. Pepper can answer questions and direct visitors to the exhibits. Pepper can also display images, text, and video on a tablet mounted to her chest. She can also tell stories and collect limited information. She can dance, play air guitar, and pose for selfies. Here at the African Museum, she is educating some museum visitors on Swahili greetings.
Today, Swahili, also called Kiswahili, is spoken by millions of people in Eastern and Central Africa. I have a fun idea. Let's try saying the first word in Swahili on the list together. Jambo.
Pepper doesn't have artificial intelligence like the Star Wars robots, so all exchanges are scripted by her supervisor, Michelle Edwards. As a docent coordinator, she's responsible for programming Pepper to welcome visitors.
We have actually 2 robots here, and so we do have one robot that will serve more as a wayfinding guide. Our museum is majority underground, so a lot of times when people come in, they don't realize they need to actually keep going downstairs to see everything. So that pepper will be programmed to answer any questions like where the gift shop is, where the bathrooms are located, what exhibitions are located on each gallery. And then we'll have some peppers that might be available that goes into a little bit more detail about a work of art that's on display.
But once she saw the robot in action, she realized it could be doing much more.
So there's a lot of different things that Pepper could do. We want to see an artist working on a work of art. People who are interested in seeing that process can see how that works.
This is the first time robots are being used in a North American museum. SoftBank will be deploying more robots over the summer. Each one costs about $25,000 on the open market.
What Pepper will do is kind of engage you and wave you down, so you might notice that there's an exhibition open.
People wonder if robots will replace the docents. Not yet, but in the future, educators and curators will be working with the robots to see what they can do.
I don't have an IT background. My PhD is in cultural anthropology, but I do work in the education department, and so my job is to see how we can engage visitors in different ways.
For the moment, all the museum jobs are safe, but we'll check back on Pepper's progress in a year or two. Carolyn Turner, VOA News, Washington.
Well, if you don't already know this, the World Cup got underway on Thursday, and Cup fever has hit the United Nations as ambassadors and staffers gathered to watch the opening match and celebrate the link between peace and sport. Our UN correspondent Margaret Bashir was there.
Normally serious diplomats were all smiles as envoys for most of the 32 qualifying teams donned their national jerseys for a group photo and to watch a live television feed of host Russia take on Saudi Arabia, ultimately winning 5-0. Russia's UN envoy noted how football is a uniting force in the world.
We turned, I think, the whole UN into a big fan zone, and we'll have something better to do this month. I earnestly hope that it will be a peaceful month for us to enjoy both peace and football.
And while you might think it's all fun and games and the diplomats have hit the pause button on the search for world peace, that's not quite the case. As the recent Olympic Games in South Korea demonstrated, the fellowship of sport can spark opportunities for dialogue.
Well, as you know, Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in February, so there's a wonderful opportunity to build peace in the Korean Peninsula, and also indicate how important a role sports can play in building peace. So I hope the World Cup in Russia could also serve as an opportunity to bring about peace around the world.
Mexico's ambassador notes that the UN and football have similar missions.
We share the same spirit. In the UN, we are trying to work together to improve things globally. And the World Cup is an expression of that too. Only 36 countries participating, but sharing exactly the same global spirit, the same sense of global community and trying to work together.
Football's unifying spirit can definitely be felt here, even in the often divided UN Security Council. The 15 members came together in their national jerseys, even those countries whose teams did not make it to Russia. While the diplomats may be half a world away from the action, their hearts are with their teams. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
It's Friday, and so let's take a look at what is trending. A dog fin rises from the water in downtown Shanghai. It sounds very scary. RoboShark's fins, tail and sleek body are built to mimic the physiology of a real shark. Chinese underwater drone manufacturer RoboSea is hoping to dominate the growing market of swimming, floating and diving robots by harnessing the design of the ocean's top predator. RoboShark is controlled by a sophisticated cockpit, much like a fighter jet, with maps and a live video feed. Its main purpose is to run underwater surveys of heat, salt, noise and magnetic waves. The company is also targeting mass market consumers with robots that can help take underwater selfies. Of course, who doesn't want to be bitten by a robot? Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, visitors to the Electronic Entertainment Expo are racing against time to free themselves from a virtual escape room. Canadian software agency The Pixel Crushers is showing off its new mobile augmented reality game called Aria's Legacy. It claims to be the first mobile escape room game to use AR. The technology creates a virtual environment around your physical space, encouraging you to roam around your room and discover various parts. But don't get happy, there are 50 different levels to complete. Well, Facebook says around 81 million people worldwide have posted, liked, commented or shared content related to that Electronic Entertainment Expo, and they did so more than 235 million times on its platform. So it should be no surprise that Facebook is taking on rivals Twitch and YouTube by introducing its own video game streaming hub called FBGG. The page will feature esports and content from the gaming industry's events such as E3. It's all in the experimental phase at the moment, but given Facebook's global reach and live video streaming features, it's sure to challenge the main players. Now you know, that's what's trending today. Time now for our Friday Music Makers segment, and we continue to celebrate the life of our beloved friend and colleague Leo Sarkisian, who passed away 1 week ago today at the age of 97. Leo had a long and storied career as the original VOA Music Man. He is the father of Music Time in Africa, creating VOA's popular and longest-running English-language radio music show in 1965. Leo traveled to every African country recording music. Here, in his own words, is Leo Sarkisian describing his career at the Voice of America.
Well, the most memorable, of course, is the way I came into the Voice of America, and that is meeting Edward Amaro, the famous pioneer of American television and broadcasting. And the most memorable moment was when he came to my home in Guinea and met me and my wife and asked me at that time if I would like to come to work for the Voice of America.
And now here's Leo.
And I'm Leo Sarkisian. Happy to have you with us today. This example is the South Central province of the country, and the dance music is from the ethnic group called Beti.
What finer passion can I have? It's been my entire life. It's from a childhood right up till today and maybe into the future. I'll still be doing my art and I'll be dancing with my music.
Great.
What else? It is passion.
Leo dancing with his music, and Leo will be laid to rest this Saturday, June 16th. Joining me in studio now is Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa. Heather, thank you so very much for joining us. You know, you've had the great honor of succeeding Leo. What do you think Leo learned from Africa, and what do you think Africa learned from him?
I think what Leo learned from Africa, two things come to mind. One is hospitality. He talked a lot about that, how he was never really a stranger anywhere. And he really appreciated that. Another thing related to music specifically is he said that when you're in Africa, you don't get the best music by just helicoptering into a place with your recording equipment. You have to spend time with people, eat their food, laugh and joke, spend the night, and then is when they give you their best music.
Wow. Really immerse yourself in a country, its people, its culture. How is it, I'm very curious, that a show that was started in 1965 is still alive, it is still running. In fact, Music Time in Africa has outlived Leo Sarkisian.
True.
So how do you now keep something like this going? How do you keep it feeling new, feeling fresh, and how do you keep it relevant?
Well, I keep it going by sticking with what Leo believed in, which was a mixture, playing music, grassroots music, as well as contemporary music. So a mix of traditional and new. And that we keep going, and that keeps it alive, because traditional music is always beautiful, people always love it. But there's a lot of new music coming out, and young people like to create new music, and so that kind of generates that audience that keeps on growing and growing. Another way that we've changed it to help it grow into the modern age is by communicating with people using social media. So Leo used to have this big library downstairs and in the basement here, and he had audience mail that would come in by the bucket loads, physical mail that he would open and read, and he and his wife Mary would go through it on the weekends. Every person that wrote, they would write back. But we don't do that anymore. And so now we have social media, we have YouTube, we have Facebook, and I'm able to talk with my audiences directly.
Well, I think this was truly a life well lived. I'm relatively new at VOA, but you cannot work here without knowing about the legend that is Leo Sarkisian. Heather, thank you very much for a very interesting segment as we remember the life and times of this legend. And if you want to learn more about Heather or her music, the VOA radio show, you can visit Facebook and type in the keywords Music Time in Africa. And you can see what time her program can be heard in your area. You can also get more information about some of her featured artists. And so we're going to leave you now with the song Magbe Yenwa. This is an unreleased recording by Leo Sarkisian of a young Fela Kuti in 1965 in a studio in Lagos. From all of us here in Washington, do have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Liquid boils when it is heated to a certain temperature.
Boils down to this.
So Jonathan and Anna are probably talking about cooking. Or are they? I got a job offer.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thanks. But the job is in California. All my friends and family are here in DC.
Look,